Hi, I'm Brian Dunn, and welcome to the most important podcast ever. What makes it so important? It's not about me, it's about you. This podcast is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, the moments of resilience, the lessons learned, and the small acts that made a big difference. From retail floors to boardrooms to Main Street, we'll share the untold stories that shape lives and careers. We're very fortunate this week, and our guest is David Grau Sr. David is an award-winning author. He's a former attorney, which we're going to forgive him for, a securities regulator, and a longtime advocate for small business owners who want to build something that lasts and makes a real difference. And as our regular audience knows, we've had a lot of small business owners on, and I thought David would be just such a perfect guest to get his perspective on sort of the A to Z of it. And with that, I want to welcome David. Hi, David.
Thank you. Glad to be here, and I appreciate you having me.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that introduction?
I'm a small business mechanic. I love small business owners, not because they're always super successful, because they always try really, really hard, and their heart's in the right place. And I was one of them. But just to be clear, to me, a small business isn't 100 people or 200 people or 300 people. Technically, that's still small. But to me, most small businesses are anywhere from about 2 to 25 people. Most of my clients fit in that realm, and those people, they have my eternal respect.
Me too. In fact, David, you've spent decades helping founders build businesses that can survive and thrive beyond them. I'm just wondering, with your very impressive background, how did that become your life's work, or the passion project that it clearly is for you?
Well, I think the short answer, as I was saying before we started, is probably attributable to serendipity. But you work hard enough, and you keep your eyes open and your mind open, and it's funny how opportunities present themselves to you. So I came out of the Midwest. I grew up in most of my family's from a little town called St. Joe, Michigan, on the southwestern tip of the lake, which was too cold for me. So in college, I moved down a little further south, all the way to Purdue, and went to Purdue University, was an English major and a business major, so a dual major. And after that, I went into law school. But I didn't plan it all out very well, Brian. So I went to school full. Actually, I married my high school sweetheart first, and next week is our 48th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Thank you, and I'm always so proud when I remember, and she doesn't. But but I got married first, and we had a child and a mortgage too soon, and then I decided I wanted to go to college, so got into Purdue. 5 years it took me to get everything I wanted done there. Went to law school and went to night law school, but I did it kind of backwards, as they say, because it doesn't matter if it works. But I went to school full time and I worked full time, and I mean that's like 2 full-time jobs every day for 9 years. And so when I came out of all that, I was tired, and I was I put a lot of distance between myself and the family because I was literally never around, or if I was around, I had my head in a book. And so a good friend of mine said, I'm going to give you the best advice you ever got. You need to take 2 years off. And I said, that ain't happening. And he goes, no, here's how it works. And my apologies in advance to any government worker out there. He goes, I'm going to get you a job down with Salem, Oregon, with the security section. And he goes, you're going to think it is 2 years off, because I mean it's 8 to 5. You have 2 mandatory breaks. You have 2 weeks you have to take off every year. The union will expect you to take 2 sick weeks off, one at a time, one a day at a time, and you'll have at 5 o'clock you have to leave, and you can't take any work home with you. It'll be like taking 2 years off, and so I did it, and I was tired, and I think I lost about 20 pounds through those 9 years. But I settled into the job of a securities regulator, which I was excited about. My friends thought I was nuts, but I invested in the stock markets when I was, 13 years old. My
Wow.
dad was a small business owner, used to take me into the offices of Merrill Lynch as a kid, and computers weren't so prominent back in, 1969. So we
Right.
watched the ticker tapes. They were actually tapes, go by, and I learned a lot about it. And so I became a securities regulator, got me into a securities law practice, and as I sat down one day, they said, "Hey, kid." I was old enough not to be a kid, but I was the youngest one in that group. They said, "Your job is to write the transition and succession rules for this newfangled idea that's come up called independent financial advice." And I thought, well, they must be talking about Charles Schwab. But by 1993, when I did all this, it was much bigger than that. It hadn't grown to the point where it is today, where it's, I think, actually overtaken the wirehouses. But it was growing and it was big, and they said somebody's got to figure out what happens at the end of an independent advisor's career.
Mhm.
What do they do with those clients? So I said, well, where do I start? And they said, well, just look at all the other states and copy what they did. So I started doing the research, and most of the states had not figured it out. And that's how I started to figure out how a small business, a financial advisor to be short, but they're not that different, how that little business could perpetuate itself and grow to a second, even a third generation by the book within the rules. I
Yeah.
wrote it out.
Wow. That,
Serendipity.
yeah. What a interesting training ground.
By the way, when I came out of that office, I had handled a couple of very high profile cases. And so the day I left, I started my new career as a securities attorney. So, and you'll appreciate some of this terminology. Maybe our younger small business owners will roll their eyes. But I sat down and I wrote a letter to every single independent financial advisor in the Pacific Northwest. I used a program called WordPerfect. I don't even remember the computer anymore, but it worked. And I had a tractor feed dot matrix printer that would do merge print, which at the time was cutting edge. I fed in a mailing list that the state of Oregon kindly donated to me. I don't think they knew they did that, but they did. And I wrote a letter. I printed out 100 letters a day, and I signed them personally with a blue ink pen. I put in 2 business cards, and I said, I used to go after you. Now I'm going to be the first guy. Take a bullet for you. So if you need help, call me. I got calls within 48 hours.
Really?
And then one day, one of my clients said, David, I'm like 68. I've got, at the time I thought it was a lot of money, but he said, I got 15 million in assets under management and I need to retire. Doctor says it's time to do something less stressful. Can I sell it? And I said, hey, I know the answer to that question. And I helped him, and we did. And then little by little, we did it over and over and over. So I started with that group, but I learned it works with basically all small businesses if they prepare.
And one of the concepts that you comes across in on your website and in parts of your book, when did you realize that many successful founders were unintentionally creating businesses that were solely reliant on them?
took me a while, Brian. So, um, in the financial services world, it's a highly regulated group of people, and so you've got um, state and federal governments that kind of mandate certain behaviors and certain levels of performance. But as soon as I branched out to other professional service providers, doctors, dentists, lawyers, accountants, architects, consultants, engineers, what I found was that they were all in on, I would love to perpetuate my small business. I'd love it even more if my son or my daughter would join, but I'd also like to have one or two key employees in that mix.
Mm.
Do you think you could help me set that up? And so as a consultant, I would take those on. And it was fairly easy working with folks. I'll just say our age. I think I'm older than you, but um, as a founder, they wanted to perpetuate it.
Of
But when
course.
I sat down and I talked to the next generation, and so I call the founders G1 for generation one.
Yeah.
I call the next generation G2 and G3. And when I sat down and I talked to them, I did it every single time. I was doing this 100 times a year, 100 different companies, 100 little businesses. The small businesses, of 20 employees and um, owners combined, 20 employees, owners combined or less. I would talk to the 36-year-old who had been an employee their whole life, and we would talk about them buying into ownership. Maybe a 10% stake might cost them $350,000. We'd get them a bank loan. They'd have up to 10 years to pay. Um, full disclosure, full due diligence. They'd see everything. And their one concern every time was, is this a real business that I work for? Everything seems to run through the founder, my boss. And honestly, when he or she isn't here, everything kind of stops. And so, what if they don't come back from vacation? What if they have a heart attack 5 years into my 10-year note? How do we get this thing out of the boss's head and and onto a table where the
Right.
rest of us can execute it? And the first time I heard that, I was like, okay, I can deal with this. But then I heard it, 30 times, 50 times, 100 times. And so one of the things I started to realize was um, it isn't enough for the founder to have the desire to perpetuate the business. We have to have a business to perpetuate. So one of the coolest things I get to do as a consultant, as I do it, is I don't only talk to the founder about what the founder's hopes and wishes and dreams are. I get to talk to the founder's son, daughter, next generation key employees and find out what their hopes and dreams and fears are. And the most common fear they had was, am I buying into a business? Or is this a job with overhead? Everything runs through the boss. The boss doesn't come back one day for any reason. There's nothing left. That doesn't seem like a business that is very investable. I had to solve it.
Yeah. And were they right?
The
In
more I heard it and the more I investigated, the more they were right. I talked, when I was in my 50s, I talked to 50-year-old founders, and they were passionate about what they did. They loved their business. They were married to it. They gave it every ounce of energy they had, and you just, it's hard to hold them at fault for anything. But they were the hub of the wheel in almost every instance. They didn't even realize it. They were just doing the job as best they could for their clients, for their employees, for their family, and they ended up being the system.
Is that what you refer to as the founder's treadmill?
Exactly.
I have a question. I can I don't imagine you set sail and say, I'm going to build a business solely relying on me that requires 70 hours a week of my life, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure it happens over time. And I'm wondering, does that scare off the next generation?
It scares them. It doesn't scare them off in terms of getting a job with benefits and the opportunity to learn. But when you ask the next generation to commit their career to the process, to go out and get a bank loan for, three, four, maybe even $500,000 on
Yeah,
a 10-year note, and to commit their money and most of their profits and, yeah, their career to this small business, they start to look at it a lot differently and they ask a lot of questions. And some of those questions are very hard for the founder to answer. Giving up control is just not something they've ever thought about doing, but
right.
now they must.
I can imagine
Yeah.
the very things, and it's true in the big corporate world as well. The very things that make you successful as you get promoted and moved up the ranks, you need to actually push some of those things to the side
Yeah.
and allow your team to develop themselves and to learn. And I would imagine somebody that has that fierce entrepreneurial spirit, it's not first nature, maybe not even second nature, to hand that over.
It's incredibly difficult, and to their credit, when an entrepreneur begins a new small business, what, what do they go in with, right? Most of the time, it's the venture, and they've got, obviously they've got passion, they've got an idea, they've got some certain, let's call it a high level of experience or a skill that they want to share with the world. But once you go out into sole proprietorship or a sole shareholder S corporation, you've got to make it work. I mean, your family fortune is kind of on the line. So what do you do to make sure it works? You depend on you. And so and the first thing you do is Monday morning, 6 a.m., you hit the road and you're out there selling, building, fixing, assembling desks and chairs, whatever it takes. That's every small business owner's motto. And here's the trap: you work hard, you have a passion, your eyes and ears and your heart is open every day to the possibilities. You care more about the clients than they can ever imagine. So for the first year or two or three, it works. The business grows, you make money, the clients are appreciative, the employees see your passion and your energy, and they want to follow you and be like you. The problem is, 5 years later, you're still the hub of the wheel. And you may have 7 or 8 or 9 or 20 people circling around you, but you build a business where everything has to come through you, where you have total control so that you can make sure that it works. And if you don't let go of that, eventually you own a job with overhead. And that's what happens to most people. It happened to me.
And could you define a job with overhead for our audience, please? I think it's an interesting concept.
Well, so, let's just say the common path. Most people, like myself included, we come out of college and we go, sometimes we go to, graduate school or get a master's degree. But eventually, we got to start working and paying the bills. So we go get a job and somebody hires us. We're a W-2 employee. And we work, we learn, we study, and we start paying the student loans off. So that's a job. Everybody knows what a job is. But, 5 years later, maybe 10 years later, for me, it was, from mid 30s, same for my wife. Um, you get to the point where you go, okay, I think I've had enough of this. I, I want to work for myself. The person I'm working for, I'm not learning anymore. It isn't fun anymore. It's not challenging. So I'm going to be my own boss. And you save as much money as you can. You get as ready as you can, and you hang out your shingle, however that may be, whatever walk of life and skill that is, and you start to build a business. Let's say you set up an S corp. You're the sole shareholder, and and you start to build a business around you, your skills, and your passion. And again, going back to that trap, most people don't realize when they step on that treadmill that, yeah, you can run faster. Yeah, you'll run steeper if you have to. Survival depends on it. But you forget where you're at, and you forget that hard work and you alone are not a system. And if you don't fix that, if you don't realize that, and you don't understand that there's something more to being a business, you end up owning a job with overhead. You do own it, but that's better than not owning it.
Right.
But it's not a business, respectfully so.
I imagine, I think this is fascinating. The psychology of that is I'm going to be very confident and feel secure counting on myself.
Yeah.
But it's actually a very vulnerable business model,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
To be
Depending on
dependent
yourself,
on,
yeah,
yes. Yeah.
it works for 2 or 3 years. And that's the trap. You go, so it works so well. It got me, I'm safe. I'm making a living. I'm bringing money home. People want to work for me. The clients are so happy with our services. What's next? Do more of what I did.
Right.
Totally wrong answer.
Right.
What you
Right.
have to do is start to build systems and figuratively speaking, look down. Where are you? If you're on a treadmill running, 80% speed and you're on a 30% incline, how much longer can you practically do that? At some point, you have to hire help. Sure, I did all that, didn't change anything. When I got to 8 people and we doubled in size, I was twice as busy because I routed everything through me. So what you have to do is learn how to hire talent and then give them authority and trust them. You don't let them do whatever they want. You got to give them boundaries, but you have to push things out away from you and learn to be the CEO, not the key employee.
And doesn't that also mean, David, that you have to be willing to let them make some mistakes as they're learning their way to things?
Yeah.
Not crippling mistakes, right? I presume you're going to have your fail-safe mechanisms, but you're certainly going to have to let them find their way to do things.
So I actually wrote, I can't remember where it's at in the book, but I wrote a book. It's not too intimidating. You can read it on a weekend. You can put it in place on Monday morning. But one of the things that I wrote in there, Brian, to your point, is I said, yeah, you have to let people make mistakes, but you do it within boundaries. So
Right.
what you say is, okay, um, first job, as a founder, you got to get the business out of your head. That's hard work. Got to get it out of your head onto paper, or I guess digitally speaking, you type it out, right?
Right.
But you got to share what you know and what you expect, and the methodology and what good enough means, or what your expectations are. So then you say to the person, Becky, I give you permission to do the following things. Now, if this happens, you may make a full and final decision. Come tell me about it. If that happens, I'd like you to gather all the facts and bring it to me. And if this other thing happens, I'd like you to do this. And so what you do is you lay that out in writing. It's not exactly an employee handbook, but it's a playbook. And you tell people, I give you authority within these boundaries, and let's do this for 6 months. And as you grow, as you learn, and how do we best learn? We make mistakes. That's okay.
That's right.
We'll adjust the playbook, and I'll adjust the expectations, and I'll adjust the training. But I don't want you to route everything back through the hub of the wheel. I want you to keep it out in your side in the circle, and you're going to make these decisions. You hire that person for the purpose of that. You train them. You trust them. Now you may not hire the right person, but that's a different problem. So gotta give them authority and trust, but you also have to teach and have clear expectations in writing. Put
Yep.
it on paper.
If you don't give the opportunity to the employees to learn their way through things, you won't know if you've hired the right employee,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And then it's much better to know that earlier rather than later, isn't it?
Well, one of the things I talk about in the Founders Treadmill, it's not me preaching from the pulpit to the choir, to the audience, right? In chapter 2 is kind of my story, and I call it the Founders Two Treadmills. It was my experiences and all the mistakes I made, and so, I would hire someone, and then I would give them the minor task to do, and I didn't, I didn't hire them specifically to do things. I hired them to help me. And so my point in the Founder's Treadmill is one of the first things you do is you get the business out of your head, put it on paper, type it onto a word processing document. Then figure out what are the things you absolutely hate to do. What are the things that you don't necessarily enjoy, but for the time being you need to do to make the business go. And then what are the things that, I could list 4 or 5 categories, but, things you don't like to do, things you will do, um, things that you love to do, that you want all of that particular task. Take the things you don't like to do, write them out one at a time, and then hire for that task. Go get the person to do that thing or those 2 or 3 things. Now who do you hire? Well, now you aim for a different person. You interview with a different goal. You listen for different skill sets. You ask questions that are, have you ever handled this kind of a problem? Have you ever worked for this kind of a firm? Have you ever had a boss, in my position? And you bring that person in, you give them the authority, you give them the boundaries, but you hire them to do it. That turns out much better than hiring for help. I call it hiring for leverage.
I love that concept, the concept of hiring for leverage. I think it's so smart. We are rapidly approaching the end of
Okay.
part 1. And I just want to ask you this to close out part 1. If a founder or a potential founder is listening today, and I guarantee you they are, how will they know if they're building a business or simply creating a demanding job for themselves? I mean, it's 2
Yeah.
very different things, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. Night and day. And I think the shortest, simplest test without being flippant is, um, can you walk away? I've seen that someone else came up with the idea of the 2 week stress test. It was about 7 years before I was willing to do this. Could you walk away from your business for 2 weeks completely? Now, I don't mean watching it on your iPhone or your laptop or calling every day. Walk away. You disappear. And fortunately, the stress test is, this is your choice. But it could happen.
Of course.
Car accidents, a skiing accidents, a heart attack. Life happens out there. What would happen to your business? And write it down. I'm an English major. Write it down. What's the first thing you think would break? Who's the first person that would likely fail because they just don't have the authority? Who's the first person that would run into a problem and walk into your office and say, uh-oh, who do I ask? That's the 2 week test. If the business can't run for 2 weeks without you, you don't own a business. You own a job with overhead.
So powerful, so strong. Um, I'm going to talk about part 2 in just a second, but I'm wondering
Sure.
if you could, as we close out our part 1, David, could you tell us the names of your books and where we
Oh,
can
sure.
find them? Of course, I'm going to tag them, but it's very compelling information. And if you have a small business, if you're thinking about a small business, if you dream of starting your own business, these books are really excellent to help your thinking.
My newest book is called The Founder's Treadmill. And I literally wrote it for the too busy sole proprietor or sole owner of a business. Again, it's about 150 pages long. It's built and written to be read in a weekend and applied on Monday morning. Now, it'll take you longer than that to implement all the strategies because I lay out a 5-year plan. But this is for anybody who's on the treadmill. And just a real quick caveat, you don't always know it. If everything depends on you, if you're the hub of the wheel, if you're the most important person in the room, not because of your knowledge, but because everyone depends on you, you're on the treadmill. This is how to get off.
And if
My
I could
other-
just, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I just want to add to
Yeah.
that. I bet the majority of them don't know they're on a treadmill.
Nope. I didn't.
In a different way, I didn't either. So I understand. Anyway,
My other
your
best,
next,
yeah. My other best-selling book is this one. It's called Building with the End in Mind. So if you're not on the treadmill and you're safely, solidly on firm ground, and you have a business that you could take 2 weeks off, and if you're like me, you come back and it's actually running better than when you left. Kudos to you.
Yep.
What's next? And so building with the end in mind, that's all about perpetuating the business and bringing next generation key employees, maybe even a son or a daughter, into the business. Don't give it away. How do you sell that equity to them? Where do they get the money? How do they learn to think like an owner? That's building with the end in mind. And I've got other books, but those are the two main ones that most of the people that I work with read and study and ask the most questions about.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place for us to leave part one, because in our next conversation, we're going to discuss succession planning, stewardship, continue discussing leadership, legacy, and how business owners can build organizations that will truly outlast them.
Isn't this fun?
Oh, it's so much fun, and I can't wait to do part two.
Cool.
So that's it for this episode of the most important podcast ever. A big thanks to David Grau Sr. for sharing his story, and an even bigger thanks to you for listening. If you've enjoyed this conversation or know somebody that would benefit from it, please share it with someone and be their friend, because they'll appreciate you for it. You can watch and listen to us on YouTube, our YouTube channel, and wherever you get your podcasts. And I want to thank the crew here at Streetside Studio 7, and I want to thank our hosts, Deja Blue House of Coffee in Alexandria, Minnesota. Best cup of coffee in town. We'll see you next week.
Cool. Thank you.